This is The Naked Life with Roxanne Noor. Hello, my snuggle puffin.
Hello.
Hi. Thank you for joining me today in your studio. I was thinking about our relationship, and what I love most about our relationship is the fact that we can do such seemingly different things, from going to Burning Man and tripping in the desert to then doing something like Vipassana with Goenka, and that it's not actually contradictory. It's like all part of the human experience, and we choose both sides to involve ourselves in celebration and passion, but then to also involve ourselves in this kind of neutrality and peace. And so today I want to unpack what our Vipassana experience symbolized to both of us, what the practice actually is itself, and then how to integrate a practice like that into the fabric of everyday life. So let's start by, you can just explain for people who don't know, what is Vipassana? What is the layout of Vipassana?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny. I just thought about our conversation before we actually went to Goenka, where I told you that Vipassana is actually body scanning, and you were like, "Oh, what? I didn't know that." And from what I also now think is that there's different styles of Vipassana. There's not just like one Vipassana technique, and there's several different ways of noting. And for example, I heard about like noting your thoughts and then being in equanimity with your thoughts. But the way I've learned it now 2 times with Goenka, which has over 120 Vipassanas all over the world, which is, I would say, the most successful name in the game, is body scanning. So you basically, and it sounds very unspectacular, you basically start to pay attention on your whole body. You observe everything that comes up. And instead of reacting to what you feel, you just observe. And the key word is equanimity. And equanimity is a word I actually never understood what equanimity means. Even when I translated it to German, they say it's like Gleichmut or Gelassenheit. But the best definition for me is non-reactivity. It's like literally not reacting, which means that you don't say it's good or bad. You just observe. And that's literally what he tells you for the whole 7 days. I mean, it's a 10-day Vipassana, and in the first 3 days you actually learn Anapana. Maybe you can talk a little bit about Anapana afterwards, which is almost like sharpening the blade of the so-called surgery you do with Vipassana afterwards. So yeah, Vipassana is body scanning, and it's a technique you learn day by day. You go deeper, you start to notice more stuff. I, for example, in the beginning didn't even notice that I had sensation on most parts of my body. So through the whole process of sitting still for 10, 12 hours a day, waking up in the morning, not talking, not consuming, not doing anything that distracts you, you really start to feel more. So your sensitivity goes up, which then again shows you more of all the things you basically don't feel, or you react without even realizing it. And I think that's the most interesting part about Vipassana, is to realize how many things you react, which you're not even aware of that you're reacting. So the veil from your subconscious just starts to get smaller, and you start to feel more. And for me personally, since I'm a very cerebral person, my thoughts get way more real. Like I almost feel sometimes I felt the things more intense, but I also saw way more. So I saw stuff so clearly in front of my head that I sometimes felt that actually happens right now, just because I was so connected to the subconscious, and therefore also sometimes reacting with really weird emotions, with like numbing or like trying to distract myself. So I think that's just like the process of Vipassana, is to bring you back to stillness, and then to observe, and then through observation to see all the different ways how you react, and then learn with equanimity to not react, to just stay there. If it's an itch, there's an itch, and you just wait until the itch is gone. Sometimes it takes a minute, sometimes 2 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes. Pain comes and goes. So yeah, the whole law of impermanence becomes very clear. And I think that's what for example, for me was most valuable takeaway from my first Vipassana I did, was that I just stopped being scared of certain states to stay. So even the worst nightmares or the worst days, I know it's gonna pass, and that somehow felt like the biggest takeaway for me in day one. So yeah, I think that's like short for Vipassana, I would say. Seeing clearly is what they also say, right? Like seeing how things are.
Yeah. So the actual definition would be it translates to clear insight. And like you said, there's like a multitude of ways to actually get there. The Goenka style is very much the Anapana, which is observing your respiration in like a really small area at the tip of the nose. And then other people's is the process that I've done before that I told you about in Thailand in different centers, of knowing and noting. And it's basically seeing the contents of the mind, and also seeing the ways in which, exactly as you said, it's Goenka would call it a Nietzsche. It's impermanent. And it's the same thing. You brought up a lot of different things, but one thing that I felt was the most interesting was the relationship that we all have to pain, and the way in which it's almost like we're programmed to push it away. And with this whole thing about the word dukkha that they have in Buddhism, in Pali, which translates, it's either suffering or dissatisfaction. Life is suffering, life is dissatisfaction. And I think what they mean by that is the smallest things that we do, from what you said, itching your nose, to maybe shifting posture. Everything is to ease the suffering that we feel. But then if we can sit in the suffering, we see that all that makes it suffering is just what we label it as. And to me, that was the most interesting thing, is when you're sitting and it's difficult to sit especially after 1 hour, it's so uncomfortable, the body starts to cramp, the knees get sore. But when you're doing the body scanning and you're taking it bit by bit, the way in which you see how actually we know that everything is change in life. We're seeing it with the seasons, we're seeing it with birth and death, but then to actually experience it in the framework of your own body is so powerful. And to see the way in which we are all so reactive to pain, and that is in itself almost an argument with reality, with what is. And the more that we can sit and, how Goenka says, observe, the more we can see how everything changes. And I think too, what was interesting, we can both go into this, was when he was talking about the process of observing sensation, and how everything is this dialogue between the external and the internal world.
The body mind,
that
matter-mind, matter-body connection. Yeah.
And when we're seeing the outside world, what we see is the elements, and how each sensation is actually a reflection of each element. So he talks about fire being like, when you look at pain, okay, actually maybe it's this feeling of being really cold or really hot, or maybe it's the earth element, it's like the density and the pressure. Maybe it's the air element, which is gaseous bubbles. And looking at it in that state instead of calling it pain. And even our teacher, it was really interesting, when she was giving advice to all of us, she said just even the word pain has such a negative connotation. She was flipping it backwards and calling it nape instead of pain, just so we wouldn't have the association with what pain is to us because of that negative connotation. But I thought it was intelligent to label the pain in a form of sensation, which is always an element that is existing in the external world.
I want to maybe just mention one thing in the beginning of this podcast, because it's really important. You said it already, like this idea of like, we know that everything is changing. It's literally like Goenka always says, you are not here for the intellectual entertainment, right? You're here to actually experience the wisdom. And that's why I sometimes have a hard time talking about those things on podcasts, because it's like, like I said, pain for most people, it's like, yeah, I know that I can like just go through it, but it's so hard, right? So I just want to like mention that it's literally like something we have to experience in any way, like the impermanence. Like for me, this time, I think the most, like I actually would say that you maybe struggled more with pain. I actually struggled way more with craving. So pain, I already felt after the first Vipassana, I was almost never in pain. In the whole 10 days, I never felt like, oh, I can't do this anymore. I could have sit more. But this one time where I felt not even pain, but it felt very uncomfortable was when 2 flies were mating on my forehead. So there was like an afternoon where 2 flies were on my forehead, and I hate flies on me. I usually always, like as soon as there's a fly, I like go away. So I was like so determined to just not react, and they were on me for like minutes. And now I can actually say like I've experienced those flies on my forehead, and I know that they're actually not uncomfortable, that it's just my conditioning. But saying that, it doesn't, like understanding that doesn't really do anything, I think, as long as you don't experience it. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. And I just wanted, before we go more into personal stories and more deeper into the Vipassana, I wanted to know personally from you. It just came up for me, since you already did other Vipassanas, more cerebral focus, like more noting with thoughts. Just wanted to know what you feel was more, like, do you feel like Vipassana, the way we learned it with Goenka, was harder for you to actually feel sensations rather than just noting your thoughts? Like, would you recommend me, for example, to go to a different style next time?
Yeah. So I think with Goenka, the beauty of it is, yes, well, first of all, to answer your question, yes, I was able to feel sensations, but I know it's also because how you said, like, the environment is so conducive to you being sensitive. So it was so interesting that even when we got out of Vipassana, and I told you on like our second day out, when we were sitting and we were meditating and we were in our hotel room in Cape Town, I was like, wow, I'm already losing my sensitivity. Like I remember doing the body scanning, and you start at the crown of your head, and it was like my full head was tingling when I was there. Even like, yeah, day 3, day 4, it was like fully tingling, and I could feel it. And in Cape Town, because yeah, we're in a city, there was a lot of stimulation, I was like, it was difficult for me to connect with sensation. And so the whole environment is conducive to you being in tune with sensation. So no, it wasn't difficult for me to feel that. And then later on, what you do anyway with, first you're taking the body segment by segment, and then later when you get good at body scanning, you're doing the sweeping. And by the end of it, like, you experience the same thing where you're just sweeping the whole body and everything is just tingling. And that's why they call it the whole process of returning to the non-self. And that's the line that's between Goenka style and all the ones I've done in Thailand, which everything is coming back to the form of non-self, that there's like no one really there. If everything is just current and moving sensations, if you're not the contents of your mind, then there's no one. And that's the premise of both. So both things kind of take you to the same place. The beauty, I would say, of the ones I've done is the fact that it's just more of the way of life that you're doing than just sitting there. So Goenka style is really focused on the sitting, which can take you to a transcendental place. And the ones I've done are more of way of life. It's seva, it's doing service, it's doing dhamma. It's like you're more involved in giving and not just sitting. So I told you before, but you're cleaning toilets, you're mopping the floor, you're doing things to contribute. And then there's also walking meditation. So you're moving your body, which makes it, for someone like me, who I do feel pain sitting for more than an hour, it made it easier in that sense, just physically on the body. So it's just a completely different experience in that sense.
Yeah, I actually this time didn't feel the sweeping. Only one day I had like a short moment. So this time was very weird for me because I really felt so not sensitive. Even after like 5, 6, 7 days, there were parts of my core, of my chest and my belly where I almost felt no sensations. And I told you I then cheated and I used another technique for one day, and it actually made me feel I feel like it worked better. But that's why I was thinking maybe, because I heard that some people have really big problems with Goenka, the way with the whole like body scanning, if you really have not a lot of sensitivity in your body, and that whole idea of like noting the thoughts and like dropping them, or like just like observing them, sounds almost like something I could probably easier get into than dissolving my body for some reason. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And so I also wanted to ask you, one thing that's a huge central theme, and he talks about it in the beginning especially, is this purification of the mind. And you also brought up this word neutrality. When you think about what neutrality actually is in your life, and he brings up, we can touch on this together, aversion and craving, what is a way that you feel like what brings you to purity in everyday life? Because in Vipassana, obviously, it's easier, where we don't have any external distractions. We don't have our phone. We're not needing to work. What helps you to purify your mind afterwards?
This is a really good question, because I think until Vipassana, I was still thinking that equanimity or peace or just like that feeling of like non-duality is like some crazy phenomena, because I used to take psychedelics and then sometimes you go into like those crazy states. But what I realized now is that it's also the absence of any emotion. So purity, peace is the absence of identification, obviously, but therefore also the absence of craving for anything else than what is. And I told you already, like, for example, sometimes when I watch birds, it just drops. Everything drops. There is no, oh, this feels good. There's not even a it feels good or it's nice. It's literally just like happening. And I think that's what most people get wrong about meditation or about spirituality or about enlightenment. Is like, there's not a lot. Like, I think there's so many people that are way more enlightened than we think, and they never did any spiritual practice just because they're so in tune and they're so in nature and maybe not like stimulated. And for me, it happens usually when I'm in nature long enough, or I'm swimming and I'm just like in my body, and there's like not a lot happening anymore. There's no thinking, there's no time, there's no sensation even necessarily. Yeah, like I said, like if you're like 250 micrograms of acid and you go into that crazy state, this is still a phenomena. This is still something. It's not the pure thing. The pure thing is way more subtle, and I think for me it happens in everyday life when I don't try to do something, like when I'm not trying to meditate even. Like if I stop try. And that happened for me exactly in day 7 or 8, where I just stopped trying to scan my body. Like I dropped the effort even of like the object-subject relation. And some people call it the pathless path of just like dropping back. And that's what I sometimes experience now too in day-to-day life. Riding on a scooter sometimes.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I like this saying, like, it takes effort to be effortless. Like the state that brought you to that effortlessness was actually the beginning states of effort. And so in the beginning, he talks about having really strong sila, morality, and we do have strong morality in those states because you're vegetarian there, you're waking up at 4 a.m, you're not lying because you're not talking, you're not exaggerating truth, you're not diluting things. And so there's strong sila. And then he talks about later like adhithana, determination. And then after the determination, you have panya, which is wisdom and the ability to see things from various sides. And so there's all these mental actually kind of efforts and then the conditions that bring you into that place where then later on, as you said, like day 7, this happened to you, then you can drop and be effortless. But I think it takes actually concentration and effort in the beginning. And just through witnessing the way you are. Also, I think it's a personality characteristic you have, but also something I see that you're really good at in Vipassana is the adhithana, which is the strong will or strong determination. And what that would look like would be what you even said was your strength, which is like you sit and you don't react to the pain.
The adhithana is interesting because I feel that for me it became, I wouldn't say that my strong determination goes in every in every field of life. I feel like there's places where I'm definitely not strong, determined, and I feel, I mean, at least for my standards, I feel like I'm more like a slacker. And I want to mention this also for everybody who wants to go to Vipassana. My Tantra teacher told me that before my first Vipassana. He said, like, Mischa, if you sit for an hour, notice it yourself. As soon as you move, you will want to move again 2 minutes later and then 2 minutes later. And I started to notice that in my first Vipassana, that every time after 45, 50 minutes, I moved a little bit. The last 10 minutes were hell. So for me, it was not even just the determination. It was almost like a logical argument for, if I have to sit here for an hour anyway, I might not move. Even if it's painful, it's just going to be more painful after I moved. And it's really counterintuitive because I know how my mind works. Sometimes I'm like, oh, this hurts so much, just a little move. But then I regretted it. So the first 3 days, you don't have to do adhithana, you can still move. And I remember like on day 2, I moved a little bit. And I was like, no, this is not good because the last 15 minutes felt way more distracting. So it's almost like, it's almost for me a no-brainer to not move. But obviously, I also found the perfect sit. And I think when you do yoga, I mean, the reason why most people do yoga in India is to meditate longer, to get the body out of the way. So even this year, with all the yoga I did, I felt such a big difference to the first year, or even before my first Vipassana when I didn't do anything. So sitting still for 20 minutes was a hell 3 years ago. And now it's like, after an hour, I can still do it. And you told me about a person who did it for 17 hours straight.
Yeah.
I still can't believe that's true, but that's insane, obviously. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure there's people who do longer. I had one friend who was a nun in India, and she would say they have stretches, periods, where you meditate for over 24 hours so you don't sleep. So you're not sleeping the whole time. And there's parts where you like, even when we saw, I noticed one of our friends when he was meditating, he does this thing because he was meditating like hours and hours. People would go and eat lunch and he'd still be there. You'd get in the hall afterwards and it's like, wow, he's still sitting there. And he's leaning like so forward. And, but he's not asleep. Like it looks like he's in a really deep state, but he's like, looks like he could collapse on the ground at a certain point. And she was saying, that's also something she's experienced. And so there has to be the state. What I think is the most interesting is the whole notion that Goenka has, that if there's any truth in life, if there's any reality, it's knowing reality through the framework of the body. And I feel like because we're such a culture that's so in the intellect and in the mind, that the body is just so ignored so often. And especially as you were saying, like it's subtleties. It's like small things that we're not noticing, and how when we can be in our bodies, we can then know actually what reality is and what we feel on a really deeply subconscious level. And this is the ultimate truth. He also talks about this phrase like moha being ignorance. And a lot of the time what we hear in the West is that ignorance is bliss. But Goenka would basically say the opposite, that our ignorance to what reality actually is why we suffer. And so when we can access the framework of the body and the sensations, and we can actually understand each phenomena that's arising and passing away, how this is the ultimate form of truth, and how it's there's so many things in life that are subjective, they're just beliefs, but this is like something you feel, and that's objective reality.
Yeah, it's actually funny that you said the whole ignorance is bliss. That came up for me a few times when I was walking to lunch. So the Vipassana we went was in South Africa, beautiful nature, and the kitchen was actually pretty far away from the rooms. So you had to walk for like 5 minutes over like a big field, and there were thousands of ants. So every day I was walking through that field like everybody, and every day I was like, I'm killing at least 5 or 10 ants, probably just walking over all of those ants. And we have the Shila of not killing, so I was like, feeling like, oh no, I'm aware that I'm killing them. And then also in the kitchen there was milk, and I was like, is this cruelty free? Is that, so sometimes I also feel like ignorance is still bliss in a way, or like almost like my mind when it's like over focusing on stuff, it can also like take me out, because I was like, am I breaking my Shila for walking to lunch? Stuff like that came up for me. And the other thing which I want to hear your opinion, because you said the connection with your body is almost like this next level. But did you ever have this experience that there was also a moment when you were not your body anymore, where there was no localization anymore? I didn't have it this time, but the first time I went to Vipassana, there was one moment when I didn't feel localized in my body anymore, and that was a little bit scary for the first few minutes. And I think that's somehow probably when really nothing else makes, it's almost like that's when I probably feel like that's then the full truth. It's like when you see that even that body, even the sensations of your body is not you, and you can almost like connect to everything and feel everything outside of your body. Do you have like an explanation how that works, like on a physical level? Because for me it's so hard to understand it, that this is possible, that you can basically feel something which is not in that organism.
Yeah. So I think for a lot of people, there's this concept of having out-of-body experiences, which is maybe different than what you're talking about.
It's a little bit like that.
It is like that. Yeah. Okay, so there's the thing of being outside of your body and almost seeing yourself as like a viewer outside of yourself. And that I've experienced not in Vipassana, but on psychedelics and lucid dreaming and stuff. But with what you're saying of all the sensations are happening, and then it's almost like you leave your body. Yeah, it's interesting. It's almost like when you go so far inwards, it presses you back, it shoots you almost back out. And I think it is similar with psychedelics. When you go really, really inward, and then you become, it's almost like the personal then becomes universal. That's kind of the way I see it. I don't know how to explain a phenomenon like that.
It's really hard to describe.
Yeah, it's hard to describe, and it's hard to describe because there's so many things that we can like attach stories to, and that's what I was seeing in the beginning stages, at least the first 3 days, is there were certain thoughts and then like memories that were coming back up, and in the beginning it feels very personal, like, wow, okay, this is the story of my life, these are things I've forgotten. But then what I see gradually day by day is it becomes more meta for me. So the personal gets lost over time, and it becomes more of that universal feeling. And then I think, in the higher states, because what we really want, I think, more than everything else in life is actually, and when you look at the spiritual path as well, it's self-transcendence. It's going outside, actually. You go inside to then go outside. But what I wanted to ask you, because I feel like this is a big topic to explore itself, is when you've experienced things like what you're talking about, you have this out-of-body experience, or you are just all sensation, what do you feel like Vipassana actually, or when we experience these things like non-self, what do you feel like Vipassana does with your identity going back into the world? What does it do to your belief systems too?
Yeah, this is exactly what I was attaching this question to. It feels scary to realize that there is no self, and everybody who talks about this like idea of like, we're all one, and sounds so beautiful on an intellectual level, but then when you actually realize we are all one means that you don't exist, it actually gets scary. At least for my ego. My ego always, like, the last thing that always struggles is my name. For some reason, always my name comes up, like Mischa, and I'm like, what is Mischa? It's like that's basically how I entered this world, with this story. The story of this is Mischa. And I always have to think about those two lines in the books where there's like this, I don't know the phenomena, but there's two lines and one looks shorter than the other one. And I know that they're both the same length, but I can't change the fact that they don't look the same length. It's almost like even though I know it intellectually, and I know I could even like explain why it happens, and you know which one, right? I can actually not change the way that I see them in the same length, and that's how it sometimes feels for me. in everyday life, there's those moments where I want to tell myself, okay, this is all just one. I want to remember what I feel, but then I can't. I almost like I'm stuck in the illusion. So on that level, I feel like as soon as I leave Vipassana, the wisdom part falls away very fast, unfortunately for me. Like it's actually almost like scary how fast the perception goes back, like you said, like even the sensitivity. But there's still something that stays for me, and it's this equanimity part, this feeling of like, oh, okay, I have a tool right now and I can use this tool. And when it comes to no self or like my identity, I feel like what I struggle most is to be more attentive what happens with the people around me, like to actually like I said, like feel into other people, because I'm so in my own body and I feel myself usually, and I try to be where I am, and I feel like that's something that can only happen once I feel equanimity myself. So now what I start to notice is that as soon as I don't see myself as my own entity anymore, and there's just like this like mirror, I can I can hold space better for people. I can like see myself less important and actually less important, not just like, yeah, I'm not that important, but actually feeling like, yeah, there's no reason for me right now to react about what I want to say next.
What you brought up about identity, about the paradox of identity, of needing for you to be still important, but knowing that you're not significant or important, and holding those two truths at the same time. And it's kind of confusing going back into everyday life, where it's so important to be someone, and especially you, because you're a public facing figure. There's even expectation that's placed on you to perform, to be someone, to uphold yourself to the pre-existing identity you had that was so strong and so public. And yeah, that in itself is confusing. And the fact that we're like really celebrated for the more somebodyness that we have, the more we have really strong beliefs. And I feel like this is what I'm struggling with the most, is especially with having a message in life and making content, whether it's doing this podcast or writing a book. It seems like we're more confirmed the more we have a stronger belief system, and the more you hold your beliefs loosely, it becomes almost dangerous for art and for expression, and that's kind of confusing. I remember after my second Vipassana, it just felt like I had nothing to say to the world, and at that point I was writing more and more and wanting to develop a book, and I was publishing in different literary magazines, and I was like, I just feel like I have nothing to say to the world. And I was going to my Vipassana teacher and telling him this, and he was like, yeah, that's completely fine, like just write about meditation from now on. And I was like, I don't want to write about meditation. Like, I want to be in the human experience. And I think this is the part in which I'm wondering what it's going to do to my identity over time, is that there's so much about not suppressing in Vipassana, but also not expressing either. It's observing. And because that neutral state is so important, it's like the opposite of passion and art and creation, which for me at least comes in the surge of high emotions, or just this feeling that there's something in me that I really want to deliver and give to the world. And so this concept of non-self, it feels difficult to create things from that. It almost feels like there's not much I need to do in life besides exist really honestly. And he talks about a lot of these principles about when we're working in the world, about right livelihood, about only taking as much as you need, about all the different silas of morality. And that becomes like a way in which you're living really, really simply prior to the way that we've existed before.
Yeah, I think that's also one of the reasons why I've never fully submitted to Goenka or to Buddhism, just because I feel like exactly what you said, it lacks passion, it lacks desire, and even though I don't really relate to the Bible either, but I still see the Bible as like another approach to life, where you actually devote yourself and you actually give yourself to something, and suffering almost becomes virtuous, you know. And my favorite approach from all the theories, at least, is still like this tantric approach, where there's almost like through polarity, through desire, you can still channel the uniqueness of who you are. You can almost like share your gifts with the world, and but still it has to be based in equanimity. That's another weird dichotomy if you look at it, because the Buddhists, they say like equanimity, and that's the finish line. But then with Tantra, you basically say like, yeah, out of this equanimity, you can still create a lot with your desire. And if your desire is based in equanimity, then it will actually like benefit, the world will benefit from it. And I think in a way, obviously, even the Buddhists, I mean, for example, the women's coordinator, we talked with her after Vipassana, and I feel like she still is very, very passionate somehow about what she's doing, and still very in equanimity. So I think that's a really good example for me. But when I look at even the teacher, you said you liked her, but for me, she was very, very, very neutral. And I'm like, oh, I actually don't want to be that neutral when I'm old, you know. I still want to be I also feel like I still want to be a little bit, Goenka makes fun of that. I think at day 5 in the how do you call those discourses? He says like, yeah, there's a lot of people now who probably start to say like, this is not my scene. And I really, that's where he got me, because my mind was like, this is not my scene. You know, everybody's just like so quiet, and everybody's like just sitting. And I really feel my mind resists still to that. Like there's definitely a part of me who still is like, no, I don't want to be like that right now. I still want to suffer once in a while. And I mean, that's a healthy progression, right? If you can basically say like, oh no, I actually want to still hold on to some suffering. It makes it almost like more it's almost like you take responsibility for where you are. So yeah, I think that every time you go to Vipassana, you leave a little piece of yourself there. Like you're never going to come back as who you were. And some people, they go so many times in such a short time that they really like transform. But I think if you do it once a year, at least for my personal standard, I can now say it feels more like mental hygiene. It feels like I'm flossing my teeth every evening to keep them clean. And once a year to do a Vipassana, it gets rid of all the stuff that accumulated, all the mini conditionings. And even this year, even though I felt like last year was such a beautiful year coming out of Vipassana over Christmas and New Year's, there were so many little things that accumulated again, where I was like, oh, okay, they're back, or like certain things didn't even leave or just came back differently. So I think doing a Vipassana once a year won't make you, like, you shouldn't be scared that you will lose your identity, you know. But that some people will probably now listen to it and say like, oh, I actually would never want to do that, because then I'm gonna be a different person. I don't think that I'm that different, but I can definitely feel a difference, and I think you too, right?
Yeah. And I also think with the differences, it goes into everything that we've learned about too, with desire and suffering. Even when you think about one of the principles of Buddhism is this, especially at the end we do it, is metta, loving kindness, and it's to bring about compassion. And if you look at the etymology of the word compassion, it literally translates and means to suffer with. That when you're compassionate, your heart is open, and the suffering of the world is actually, it's your suffering too. And how difficult of a place that is to be in. And it's also like a paradox, because so much of what we learn is to, in a way, eradicate suffering. But if you think about what compassion is, and when you really love someone, and when you really feel them, and it's like they suffer and you suffer too. So I thought that was also really interesting. And what I've seen in myself is for how we talked about identity changes, it helps me to refine my desire system. So the desire system is still there, but it just feels like it's getting more and more scrubbed clean and polished
Beautifully said.
towards more of the necessary things in life, or like what are like the actual desires of my soul versus like my egoic desires or what I've been told I should want. And it's actually the same with aversions and fears. Even that becomes more and more scrubbed clean, or how they say like Vipassana is that clear insight. It becomes clearer and clearer to me the ways in which I relate to my fears, and which are actually important and significant, and which are kind of just mental garbage. And that's the beauty of Vipassana, is that the silence and the stillness can help you to see those desires and to see those fears and aversions more clearly, so you can see with intelligence and sophistication which are actually significant and which are kind of not real.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's actually what this time's Vipassana was the biggest takeaway for me. It was this realization how everything I've ever experienced, everything I've ever heard, everything I've ever seen in my life is here. It is part of my subconscious. And that really started to, like, I started to think more about my consumption, even of the good sources. You know, like I would say I'm somebody, I barely consume social media anymore, and I follow a few really cool people, you know, like James Clear or like Mark Manson, like all cool people. But even that content starts to paint a picture, a story of how the world is. And or even like reading books. Sometimes I feel like there's certain people I listen to or I read their books and I'm like, do I read this and I leave with a better sensation afterwards, or is it just making me feel smart in the moment I'm reading? So I started to realize that lots of the things I think about are so repetitive and are so, like you said, mental garbage, and they're getting fed by me choosing to consume, even if it's smart stuff. And it makes me question, like, how much do I really want to know about what's going on? And because our time is so limited, and you said it, compassion, metta, which is in my opinion very underrated in Goenka's retreat. It just comes on the last day, but I feel like metta is so powerful. And if I think about my metta experience, I actually did metta a little bit already on day 7 for myself, and I'm like, fuck, my family, you know, like feeling for my sisters, feeling for my mother, feeling for my father, feeling for my grandfather, and then realizing that sometimes I'm like the whole day on social media, or for a week I'm on social media, I'm consuming, I'm texting with people, but they're not even in my heart, you know, for a whole week, you know, because I'm traveling. And then I'm like, it just starts, like, I started to reconsider my prioritization, how I prioritize life, basically my values. And I realized, like, hey, maybe I should consume even less. Maybe I should actually like really think what makes me feel more aligned and more in peace, rather than makes me think that I'm smart. Because it's, the feeling is stimulation, it's dopamine. It's like, you read something and this makes sense, this is cool. But it's like Goenka would say, it's intellectual entertainment, or mental masturbation, how I like to call it. So it's 10 days can really make a big difference in how clearly you see. And even the fact that my thoughts are always connected to a sensation was so hard for me to accept this time. Like, I was like having like certain thoughts coming back and back and back. And then I was like, okay, I have those negative thoughts and they feel bad, but I don't feel anything. And then I was like, no, wait, I definitely have to feel something, because I don't like the negative thoughts. And I was like, oh, wait, I actually feel not good. And to localize it, you know, like, where is that negative feeling? Like, it's actually, it's been always here. There was a contraction for like the first 7 days. And then I'm like, finally, like, letting go of that. I was like, oh, wow. It was so close that I couldn't even see or feel it, you know. And there's so many little things you can't even like put in words that happen there. And you forget probably too. And sometimes you just process stuff in your subconscious that, it's so valuable to do that for yourself and experiencing it.
Yeah, and what you said too about each thought has a sensation, like almost the way I see it, and what I was thinking about even during Vipassana was how before we had our fully developed brains like we do now, there was like instinct before anything else, and how pretty much everything was based actually on what you feel more than what you think. Everything was instinct and pull in this almost like primal body that's relating to always sensation. And so even actually before the thought is the sensation, and we're just so not aware of it. And that's crazy to think about. Like, it's not even that our thoughts are creating sensations. It's like the environment is feeding us something which creates a sensation, and then we attach a thought to it. Mm-hmm. And we're so unaware of the sensation in the body usually. Yes. It's all about the thoughts. But before our brains were even developed, everything was about sensation and the way we were moved by that sensation. And so yeah, it's just interesting how heady we've all become. And really, yeah, just so much of the value to me is just the body. Yeah, being in the body and seeing what the body actually feels.
Yeah, and then still adhithana, which is a decision which has to first start in your mind again. Like basically this like, no matter what I'm going to feel, adhithana is like a decision. And that's what I made this video about me stopping cannabis, like trying it for 2 years with like emotional regulation, sensation, feeling, and like getting into this whole loop of like feeling better. And then at some point I was like, no way, I can just decide not to do it anymore. Obviously it sounds very like a masculine binary approach, but like we all have almost like this like lever in our brain that can say like on, off. And there's no option for me moving for the next hour, and that's how it's going to be. And the more you can like trust that there is actually agency over everything, the more I feel like you can also then use your mind again over your impulses.
Yeah, and that's why mind over matter, all this whole concept is so important. Yeah. And I feel like that's also where self-worth is built, because if you're breaking your own promises to yourself over time, you say something and consistently you're not following through. You say you're going to sit for 45 minutes, but you within 15 minutes you don't. Yeah. It creates this kind of diminishment where you don't believe yourself anymore, and that's where the whole concept of actually having willpower is also fundamental. I think in the beginning stages of meditation, that's also why concentration itself is so important, and that localization of it being really focused and small. And I think that's actually a metaphor for so much of life, is that the more focused and precise we can be with our words, with our actions, the more valuable life itself becomes. And I see it even in myself. And I also think that's why, to me, more than anything else in Vipassana, just the aspect of being in silence is so nourishing for the brain, just to have absolutely nothing. And it's like you said, we think that we experience things and we forget, like everything stays with us. And it's almost scary, like sitting in meditation and then like a commercial that I watched when I was like 5 years old flashes in my head, and I was like, why am I thinking about this commercial? And it's like, whoa, everything is still there. And so how you were saying to be even choosier, even more precise, even more like knowing what we don't want in our brains, and giving our attention to the things that actually matter.
And that includes people as well, right? Because I feel like that's the craziest thing. It's like, and I actually detected 2 people in my brain, like 2 internal objects of people where I was like, I have to be very careful how much I want to hang out with them. Not to say that they're not good people, but just saying they, for my personal well-being, their opinions almost don't really have a good effect on how I see the world, where I'm like, oh, do I really want to listen to that too many times? Yeah, I have to become picky.
Yeah. What do you feel is an insight that you're able to actually come back to? So you're in a situation where there's high desire or really high aversion, what is something that you feel like in those situations of high emotional complexity or nuance or confusion that you're able to come back to? It can be something Goenka said, it could be an insight you've had, but what do you feel like is your Vipassana anchor?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's anicca, anicca, anicca. It's literally like anicca because and even after the first time that happened already, when I had like a lucid dream, and I don't know if you, no, it wasn't even a lucid dream, it was like an astral projection. I didn't even know what that was. So now, since that, Vipassana, I actually know what people mean when they say they got abducted by aliens, because that's literally how it feels. So in that moment, there was a part of me who wanted to start to freak out because I couldn't move. I was in like sleep paralysis somehow. But because this anicca was already massaged into my subconscious for 2 days of like everything is passing, I literally just like was like, okay, I'm just breathing, like, and actually I just wake up, and I hear people having those sleep paralysis, and it's the worst thing for them ever. I hear people actually describing it as terror, because you can't move and you're like in this in between. So I never had a struggle with sleep paralysis, but since I started Vipassana, I had actually another one in the airplane once, flying back from Iceland, and the same thing happened. I was like about to freak out, but then I was like anicca. And I think that's somehow also what I really want to get to when it comes to like getting older and being more in pain, because he describes that he doesn't know about any Vipassana meditator, serious Vipassana meditator that died in a scared or in a painful way. Like, and then he says like, yeah, if somebody's just like dying, he's like sensation, observing sensation. Oh, there's death. Okay. Okay. And then it just goes, So I really believe that if you play this game well enough, long enough, that's how you can leave. And I never saw a person dying in front of me yet. The next person I probably will see will be my grandfather for the first time. Somebody, maybe if I'm there, and I'm really curious to see how people die somehow. I always was scared of seeing that, but now I'm like, I actually want to see how people let go, because if you can learn how to let go through anicca, through the impermanence already now with high levels of pain. Like even if I eat a very spicy chili, like it burns in my face, and I'm like, I don't resist. I just like watch, and even if there's a tear coming out, I'm just like, I resist. And so I think that's for me the main thing about the whole practice is equanimity, is like anicca. Everything is coming and going. The law of impermanence. Yeah.
Beautifully said. Yeah, and I would say, I think that is the most important, just because it's a universal law that everything is change, and if we know that everything is change, and like you said, it's not just knowing, it's also the really watching it, experiencing it in the body, that you begin to play with life more. Life becomes less rigid in a way, and you become more flexible. And there's that saying that it's not the strongest of the species that survives, it's the most adaptable. And so when you can watch the currents of change and you can be that change with it, then there is less suffering for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So thank you for coming to Vipassana with me on my birthday.
Yes.
Thank you for being my partner.
Oh.
Thank you for anicca.
Yeah, thank you for having me again on your Naked Life podcast. And also thank you for trusting me to come with me and to do this live with me. It's a beautiful ride. 1 year in the books. Mwah, mwah, mwah.
Thank you guys. Wow. Bye-bye.